Good evening. How are y'all? Appreciate you for allowing me the chance to speak tonight. I wanted to just quickly, I'm going to ask like two-part questions. You obviously have no need to participate if you choose not to, but I think as a teacher, I encourage participation. So it'll be a raise your hand if sort of question, and again, feel no pressure to participate if you choose not to. So two-part questions, right? And actually, before I do that, because I don't want to jump right into it, I want to thank you all for the work that we're doing collectively, again, and holding these hearings and staying till 10 and giving of your time to do that. I appreciate that. And so this is not a pushback against anything, it is more a push for us all as we continue to grow together. So two-part questions. The first one, and if you agree with this, you can raise your hand. Do you believe that implicit racial bias exists? Okay. Or not, thank you. Do you feel that you hold implicit racial biases? Okay. Part two, do you believe that white privilege exists? And do you believe that you benefit from white privilege? Okay, thank you to those of you who participated. And I ask these questions because I believe that where we stand on these questions is integral to how we enter this work every single day. I believe for myself, as someone who worked in education and now works in community organizing, and I believe it for us in general as a governing body. And just to be totally candid with you and transparent, in the last few weeks, I've witnessed and I've listened as some of these biases and this privilege has played itself out in the things that have been said and the questions that have been asked. And so again, coming at this as a space for dialogue and a space for growth for us all. Dr. Eberhardt, who was present on the panel, a week before the panel was on a podcast called Policy Save the People with DeRay McKesson and other activists around the country. And she wrote the book called Bias, and she was asked questions around her book in general. And she helped to break down this disparity between racism as we might see it and what unconscious bias looks like. And she said the old school racism is acute. It is kind of what we see in Charlottesville, it's what we see in the history books. Unconscious bias is chronic. She said it's always there and it flares up from time to time. And that there's a myth that having bias is equal to a deep motivation to hate. And she said that myth, that if we recognize or call out biases on ourselves or one another, is what makes that so pernicious, because we get so afraid of having those sorts of conversations and doing that own self-work. And she said we need to be able to understand the situations that cause our biases to emerge, to flare up, which can be a heightened emotional state or a need to act quickly. But she said it's important that we, especially as white people, seek to understand those things. So I'm saying this all because as we engage in this work together, as we continue to push forward, my push for us collectively is, as white people, is to understand how our biases affect the way that we are entering into the work and the questions that we're asking and the responses that we're giving. And if we have something that triggers us for some reason, when we talk about racism, then maybe it's important for us to take a step back and unpack why am I having this reaction to this and think through that. And I also want to push proximity. I know that this was offered last time in the conversation around Town Square, and I know it was offered prior to that by Andrea Castaneda talking about her students. But proximity is something that I think is lacking in our city, especially because we are such a segregated city. And I think it is critical for us, again, as white people collectively, to be proximate to those whom we are seeking change for in our city and to our fellow neighbors and residents who are subject to these issues and these concerns. Because if we're not proximate, then we can't understand the issue. And so when those offers, 60 seconds?
30.
When those offers come up to be at Town Square, to go canvassing, to talk to residents, if there's an immediate desire not to, then let's unpack why. When those offers come up to speak to students, if there's immediate recoil, let's ask why. And if we haven't actively engaged in doing those things, let's interrogate why. So with every piece of this, I'm asking you for interrogation of our own biases and how they affect the processes that we're doing, because we cannot get to the point we want to get to